graphic.
Now, the
So
graphic
the
business...
ones that have been removed,
Uh-huh.
those who have their houses already removed.
Uh-huh.
What happened to them?
It's been removed.
The consideration will come after that. Or they can rebuild.
Maybe.
Anyway, well, we'll see what happens anyway.
We'll see what happens. Graphic business, BDC struggle for dollars to import
Or they
oil.
reach some politicians' house and they say, no, we can't go further beyond this one.
Well, that's mostly the situation sometimes, you know. And the graphic business has been doing some research here that says that BDCs require $450 million monthly to import petroleum products. And the BOG, through its forward sales, is providing them with $100 million. And BOG's intervention constitutes some 21% of the demand. Now, this leaves a shortfall of $350 million to be supplied by commercial banks, and that's where the challenge is. Well, we're told that we have a man's supply. There's some, imports into the country. So, as it stands now, we don't have much of a problem. But if we do not deal with this challenge, we could face a problem, and that challenge would be fuel shortage.
The last time we did was around 2015.
Yeah.
And we told ourselves never again. Please.
Exactly.
We have gone back so many things. Not this one too, please.
Well, middlemen, not cause of high food prices. That's the General Agricultural Workers Union. Major boost for SMEs as major institutions supports development bank. And we're told a quarter of insurance claims are fake. Phenomenon soiling industry reputation. And that was, during the maiden insurance fair. I come to the photograph of Seth Aklasi, who is president of the Ghana Insurers Association, Atofo, who is managing director of Graphic, and Dr. Justice Ofori, who is commissioner of insurance.
Now, the Daily Guide is reporting this morning, NDC in ninth demo drama with police. So that arrangement was done yesterday, even though they have gone to court to try and actually challenge some part of it, but they'll still go ahead with the demonstration. It starts in the morning and ends by 4 p.m. That's what's supposed to happen from today and tomorrow. And African ministers draw a new education plan. NPP okays candidates for election. And there's one, e-levy failing to deliver. And he has a very, the picture of Gabi Otredako in not so exciting mood. You can see the man is thinking. And apparently he's been sharing some of his thoughts on happening going forward on the front page of the Daily Guide.
Just last week at the Imani GIZ dialogue series, it was obvious that over 80% of Ghanaians had reduced their transactions on mobile money following the implementation of the e-levy.
I'm extra careful. Only extremely unavoidable transactions.
In fact, if I look at my e-levy payment over the last 2 months, it's more than 500 Ghana cedis.
And I'm still getting charged for transactions between my own bank account and my own wallet.
They say I've not connected them, and maybe that's the
I
reason.
I don't get charged for that.
I actually get charged.
I get charged for it.
When I see from Raymond to Raymond, and it's
when
so
I send
painful.
100 cedis, I still get charged for it.
Yeah.
Like all these things are happening, and unless I take a phone and call them, I won't get my tax back.
Imagine.
So
anyway, let's get to the Chronicle and Romans chapter 13 verse 4. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. For rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Ramsar side dwellers, Wambai, Accra Commando ones. And you know Accra Commando?
The original minister.
Yeah, Accra Commando. That's how the Chronicle captures it, Accra Commando ones. And economy is harsh, but there's hope. That's Kuka, chairman of Odino Kwapia. Asabi's Agenda 6040 touches base with grassroots. And Subin MP hopeful pulls gun on Giver's boss, and he's been remanded. Mr. Champong he's been remanded in police custody for 2 weeks. A new NACOC Act does not legalize weed per se, according to the president.
Per se means not necessarily.
Yes.
Okay, now the Finder is reporting this morning Dr. Bawumia rallies African governments to invest in educational reforms. Poorly targeted subsidies amid crisis, prolonged effect of inflation. There's Access Bank, that's Jeff Gable. Access Bank leads conversation on the future of payments. And workers need 20% COLA urgently. Proposed hikes in utility tariffs should be suspended. This is the Trades Unions Congress. Comrades in the worker force.
Finally, the Ghanaian Times. Let's focus on TVET. VIP tells West Central Africa governments, trade minister advocates loan guarantee scheme for MSMEs and avoid monkeypox by adhering to COVID-19 safety protocols, Dr. Sasu. And 8 coins in court for defaulting in 1.7 billion SNIT workers' contribution.
All right then. Listen, let's get into this IMF conversation as quickly as we can. All right. We have on the line right now Professor of Finance and an economist from the University of Ghana, Godfred Bokpin. We also have Dr. Theo Achampong, who is a political risk analyst and economist. Good morning to you both.
Yes. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to our cherished listeners.
If it's all right, I'll start with you, Prof. Bokpin. I know that the conversation of going to another IMF program has actually been going on it's been murmured for a while. But what exactly makes it more of a likelihood for a government that has been denying such an option for so long to start seriously considering it now?
All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And you are right. The conversation has been around for some time now. Probably the ideal time for Ghana to have signed up for the program should have been somewhere last year, and probably included in the 2022 budget, right? And that's the view, and underlining view also. Government had confidence in the 2022 budget, but not all of us, including investors and stakeholders. Government felt that there were enough policies, reforms in the 2022 budget that would assure investors of a certain sustainable fiscal pathway, and that will bring down the debt or contain the debt. Then quickly they realized, we realized probably faster than government that wasn't going to work. One major policy intervention, which they call e-levy. And of course, many Ghanaians did not support e-levy. And I still don't support e-levy. And I'll still ask government to withdraw the e-levy. Then the government came up with enhanced measures, if you remember, from the ministry. Some travel bans here and there and all of that. So all those enhanced measures together with the 2022 budget actually failed to meet the expectations of stakeholders and investors. And you could see that also from our yields on our bonds. Then you see quickly Russia, Ukraine. We may not be seeing the bullets right here and the shelling here, but the effect magnifies the existing vulnerabilities and exposes the weaknesses in our economy in a way that we haven't seen in recent times.
Okay.
So you could see where inflation is, and it appears we are helpless to some extent. In the midst of all the multiple taxes here and there, the rising inflation itself is also a form of tax, especially on low-income households who have no means of protecting their meager income and savings against the rising inflation. That is not the only thing. If you look at across the various sectors, arrears, debt buildup, and all of that, we are at the point where I would say that actually time is not on our side. Time is not on our side. And I believe that government is coming to that reality. That in itself is positive. Let's not take it that going to the IMF is a sin that cannot be forgiven. I think that as a leader, as a country, we now find ourselves in a position where we must embrace alternatives on the table in the interest of the common good. To that extent, I think that I see that the ground is softening from the side of government. I could be wrong, and I'll be glad to be wrong. And somebody told me that the ground is actually not softening, it's melting very fast.
Now,
where
yes,
we find ourselves right now, it's not good. And I don't want to use certain words, right? But I think
where do we find ourselves? Tell us.
Very fast. That is what I will say. And I believe that of course, we know the position of government. We supported that position. And the reason we supported that position, particularly when we're exiting the 16th IMF program, we resolved that that was going to be our last IMF program. We supported that. We felt that as a country that won independence so many decades ago, we could not. And in fact, and any time we pick up a phone and had to call the IMF, really, it shows a certain, I don't know.
Briefly, what did we not do right after we exited the 16th IMF program?
Look, what we did not do right is actually what we haven't been doing right since independence. The structural bottlenecks, we failed to address them. Look, as part of exiting the IMF program, government came up with certain measures. Fiscal Responsibility Act, they talked about the Fiscal Council, and a number of other reforms. But you see, in implementing that, we actually didn't do what we had meant to do.
Which was?
Look, the Fiscal Council. We were asking for an independent Fiscal Council that would probably work together with Parliament to ensure that government is kept on its toes consistently. But what did we see? The president made the Fiscal Council advisory. That in itself, really, when you do that, you actually undermine confidence in your own government and economic management team. Because the point is that if you look at, in fact, post-HIPIC and multilateral debt relief initiative, right? If you look at the composition of our debt that are leaning towards commercial, that in itself should tell you that you could no longer be opaque in the management of your economy, because there are foreign investors and the things they look at, that kind of assurance that they are looking for may be different if the composition of your debt stock had more multilateral, bilateral, as we saw in the run-up to HIPIC and multilateral debt relief initiative. So that has changed.
Right.
The stakes are higher now. So we didn't do all of that. Then you look at the size of government. And government justified the size that the problems were that enormous, and therefore they needed more numbers counts. But as we can see, that hasn't happened. There are other measures, and then government-owned flagship programs, expensively arranged, inefficiently delivered. All these things have steep fiscal costs that are unbearable now. Beyond that, I mean, you can talk about the corruption and all the other things. They have been with us for so many years, but we have not made the desired progress along these lines. Right. Then you want to talk about, so government probably predicated their hope on e-levy. I believe that the evidence on the ground probably will tell them that a much better consultation, broader stakeholder consultation, embracing alternative ideas would have saved us and the rest of them.
I think it's a good point to bring in Dr. Theo Achampong, this e-levy point that you just made, Prof. Bokpin. Dr. Achampong, there is a lot of talk of the e-levy not bringing in the desired revenue. I remember a few weeks ago on this show, the GRA told us that one of the entities through which the e-levy is being collected, the largest entity, and I think we can all guess which one that is, was bringing in $1 million a day. But even at that point, the calculation told us that $1 million a day will not give us the desired 4.5 billion that the government had set as a target. How could we have got the calculation so wrong? And what effect does the failure of the e-levy have on the future prospects of a government that really does not want to go to the IMF?
Good morning once again, and to everyone. Good morning to Prof. The point is, how did we get it so wrong? Simple answer: we did not, or the government did not consult enough, because there were a lot of issues that had been raised by different stakeholders, the telcos, the users, the consumer groups, that all said that the imposition of the initial, it was 1.75%, was too much, and that government should actually consider significantly reducing the threshold below 1%, and that could possibly get them much more than the 1.5% that was subsequently agreed and implemented. But for me, the reason why we're seeing some of the trends and at least the preliminary data indicating that we're not collecting as much as had been forecasted, for me, was just over optimism and the fact that we did not consult enough to actually fine tune the policy and ensure that it actually works together for the collective good of the people. So for us, I wasn't too surprised when I was part of the group that did this survey by Imani that indicated that, there seems to be some strong consumer reaction to the e-levy. And in fact, not only the 83% say they, don't support paying the e-levy, but importantly, many of them actually indicated that the government collects enough taxes already, and for those who are willing to even pay the e-levy, only around 20% or 2 in 10 of the respondents said that, well, we're willing to pay something, but it should be less than 1%. So it's very clear that the lack of consultation, the lack of a broad-based sort of empirical basis for the imposition of the levy is what has brought us to where we are now. And I am also, like Prof, a bit concerned when you look at the other numbers, because you can see from the external sector development that we are actually burning through a lot of our reserves to actually prop up, the cedi and to support the economy as well. From June of last year, where our import cover was 5 months to cover all the goods that we needed to bring into the country. Now we're talking on import cover as of April of this year of 3.7 months, which is very, very dangerously close to the threshold of about 3 months that often would trigger
how would
a
an
country
IMF
into a
program
balance of
help
payments
us?
crisis, and subsequently having to run to the IMF for one form of support or the other. So the ground is softening a bit, and I think what the tweets and some of the news we're seeing coming through the last few days indicates that perhaps a government is seriously considering the option of going to the fund. In the absence of that, what I think they are also then trying to do is basically sourcing for more loans, except this time around we're not talking Eurobonds, but sort of bridge or syndicated loans. The challenge with that is that they are often relatively much more expensive than some of the Eurobonds, and that then adds to the already existing debt vulnerabilities in that regard.
Yeah, it's a big concern. I want us to explore this and more when we come back after the BBC News. So until then, Prof. Bokpin and Dr. Champong, thank you very much for your time. The online review is normally brought to us every morning by Zenith Bank in your best interest and Goyle Good Energy.
And Goyle, your oil marketing company of choice, keeps making life so convenient for you. Go and access Momo for all fuel purchases at selected stations. Remember to Momo it at Goyle. And that's not all. You can also use your bank card to buy fuel at Goyle, and this is made possible by APSA. So drive to Goyle stations now, buy your fuel, pay by Momo or bank card, and you're good to go. Goyle Good Energy, Goyle. Yeah, deal.
All right, you can read on myjoyonline.com about the former NDA CEO who is accusing his successor of forging his signature and some fraud as well. All right, right now it's time for the BBC News.
Brought to us by Fidelity Bank. Believe with us, Edlom Housing, where quality and spacious homes cost less, and Millennium Insurance, your trustworthy partner.
Hey, Efo, what brings you to my house this early morning? I hope all is well.
Oh, it's never well with me or my brother. After paying 3 times for the land for my project, the construction workers are giving me wahala. From material overestimation to small steering and excuses from artisans. Charlie, I'm tired though. Works that can be done in 2 weeks are done over 2 months. I have to pay them whether the work is good or not.
I told you so, Efo.
It's all because you're trying to become builders when you're corporate workers and business people. Edlom has products tailored to meet your needs. Villas 3 at Amrahia, where there are finished homes with very flexible payment terms. For more information, please visit edlomhousing.com. Send an email to sales@edlomhousing.com or simply call 0270-166-166. Edlom Housing, where spacious and quality homes cost less.
Jack, you know my boss owns a fleet of commercial cars and he drives only brand new vehicles. Latest. Before he hired me, this is what he said. Krachi, my vehicles are my investment. It is a winning, now winning, and you buy any fuel apart from Goil. Waboka, sign this undertaking.
But he was right?
Yes, and he's right.
Goil stocks only higher grade fuels, further enriched with XP3, multifunctional enhancer, more efficient, eco-friendly, and at no extra cost. Available at every Goil station at Jibedia. Goil Super XP Ron 95 and Diesel XP, higher grade fuels, excellent for modern engines and all vehicles. Goil, good energy. Yeah, yes, yeah.
Goil is good energy.
At Enterprise Life, it's possible to live your best life. Ladies, enjoy cover for your lifestyle with Bloom. Life insurance for today's woman. Families, let's safeguard your well-being with a family income security plan because family matters. And for you, live freely with our funeral finance plan unlimited with no restrictions, no limits as you cover your loved ones and yourself. WhatsApp us on 0554 001 924 or call 0307 084 444 for your solution.
You for dream big with us.
Enterprise, your advantage.
Your word is onomatopoeia. Main Event Ghana, organizers of Spelling Bee League Ghana, presents Spellington 2022. For 4 years, the Spelling Bee League has given us back-to-back excitement from the country's best spellers. This year, the campaign is set to kick off and it's all fun. It's your award between the ages of 9 to 15, all in grade 5 through to grade 9. Then, get them registered for this year's Spellington and stand a chance to win a full year's scholarship. Yes, a full year's scholarship.
Simply visit www.spellingbeeleague.com/register or scan our flyer to enroll. After registration, all participants will be provided with a Spelling Bee toolkit and be trained for free to participate. Registration is ongoing. For more information, contact 024 104 5797.
Spelling Bee League. Empowering Ghana, one word at a time. Onomatopoeia. ONOM.
For decades, we have helped businesses connect with their trade partners all over the globe. From Ghana to Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, Benin, Togo, Senegal, China, Morocco, France, Netherlands, and many other countries. We have made it possible to bring Ghana to the world. We have brought small and medium businesses closer to their customers across the regions in Ghana with our SME support facilities. We have brought relief and smiles to the faces of families with our employee personal loans. With our cutting-edge technology and digital support, we take the burden of complex thinking off you, making life simple. That is who we are. as close as a partner. Bank of Africa. We are indeed the African bank with the global reach.
Morning Show.
It's about 7:01, and we have decided, we made a decision on your behalf, that this conversation about a potential IMF program is important. So we're not going to rush to the BBC. We're coming back to our guests so that we can get more clarity for you, because this is a very, very pivotal moment in the process of making this decision, whether or not as a country we're going to embrace another IMF program. Our guests joining us by phone, Professor Godfred Bokpin, who is a professor of finance and an economist at the University of Ghana. Dr. Theo Achampong is a political risk analyst and also an economist. Now, just before the break, Dr. Theo Achampong was talking about how government could possibly have got it so wrong. Dr. Champong, Winston is curious about this.
Yeah, so Dr. Champong, so we're faced with a prospect of having to go to the IMF. Professor Bokpin made the point earlier that if we didn't do that last year, we probably may have to go in an ambulance. But let me just find out from you, how is that going to impact the Ghanaian economy? How is that going to transform our economy if we decide to go to the IMF? What are the benefits available to us?
I mean, there are always trade-offs with these decisions that have to be made, regardless. The last time we left the program was in, if I recall, April of 2019. We had to extend that program by another 9 months to a year, just so we could complete and meet certain benchmarks. But one of the key things is really the policy credibility, in a sense, that the program potentially brings, and the signaling that it sends to the broader, markets. Because remember that a lot of the interventions that have been made so far by the government to date on the fiscal side looks as though they are not delivering the expected outcomes, and this includes the e-levy, which we just sort of discussed. So beyond the immediate sort of monetary compensation or relief that will be coming to Ghana to support the forex position, the more sort of significant sort of reforms that would be needed to be implemented on the fiscal side of things, payroll reform, salary reform, the whole structure of government and the size of government and the civil service, all these things would really be on the table. And for me, always it's a bit sad, because often when the IMF comes in, the very prescriptions that they will be telling us to do are the things that we should be doing ourselves anyway, and that you don't really need an IMF as such in that regard. But many a time, the hard things that we should have been doing, we fail to do it. And I always liken the IMF, if you recall, in our secondary schools, you always have the headmaster or the head teacher who come around with a big cane trying to get you to do the very things that you didn't do right in that regard. But of course, there would be some one or two pain points. There might be some reforms that would need to be undertaken. And I think as part of the broader conversation, what the government would try to do is to safeguard some of the other sort of what I call pro-social interventions that they're making. So, for example, the question of free SHS, planting for food and jobs, all these things that, in the view of the government, is really trying to bridge the inequality gap between the rural households and then the urban households. Those are things that typically in a program you might have to make some cuts, right, to that. Okay. And I think that the negotiation or the conversation will be around, if any, some cuts can be made in that regard. and the government wanting to, as much as possible, maintain funding to do sort of pro-social investments.
Now, let me get to Professor Bokpin. I mean, talking about, these expenditure cuts and, policy shifts, are we not doing them already? We've cut down expenditure. Government, workers, political appointees have reduced their salaries by some 30%. Last year we increased salaries by 4%. This year 7%. That's a departure from the usual 10%. Are these not things we're doing already?
Not exactly, and in the manner that would get us on track. And you see, part of this government's problem is the lack of transparency, lack of full disclosure in a timely manner that assures stakeholders that government is on top of it. Let me ask you, when was the last update after the announcement of the enhanced measures? Those expenditure cuts, fuel, coupon rationalization, travel, and all of that. When was the last time we received an update? Where are we in terms of the broader outcome? Please, what the government did with the enhanced measures do not constitute a program with clear benchmarks underpinned by productivity-enhancing reforms, either from the fiscal side or probably specific sectors. So actually, we didn't have an alternative to an IMF program for us to consider. Government has not given us that. And you know why I'm saying so?
Tell me.
Let's go back to 2014, probably in similar challenges and the rest of them. Of course, now with the global dimension, it's more heightened. There was a century consensus. They call it the homegrown.
Yeah.
That was a program we had on our own with multiple stakeholders, alternative ideas, and all of that. We said, okay, we're going to run with this. Then we realized that that wasn't working. Part of that was because Ghana's international reserves was precarious. I mean, it was unsafe. Look, somewhere middle of 2014, thereabout, our international reserves on net basis could cover, I think, about 2 weeks.
2.5 weeks.
Or so.
2.5
That
weeks.
was dangerous. That was dangerous. So I believe that the government then didn't want to go to the IMF. But looking at the situation and the fact that you could no longer fund your imports and the rest of them, they made that difficult decision. And I believe that was also leadership, right? That you look at all these things and you say that, look, where we find ourselves, I will take the blame as a leader, and we will go for the IMF program. And let me tell you, if you look at some of the measures that were in the 16th IMF program, many of them were actually derived from the same consensus. So you realize that the IMF itself is flexible. And in all this discussion, of course, I have my reservations about the IMF, of course, and their conditionalities and all of that. But the IMF is not like a devil or a monster. No. I think that we need to shape the conversation a bit, because typically, and if you look at in the last couple of decades, the IMF itself is evolving. So if you look at the 16th IMF program, there were poor interventions that the IMF accommodated. Social spending, many of that. So the IMF is flexible. If you look at the IMF in the last 30 years, you realize that they are embracing emerging challenges like climate change, job creation, inequality that are assuming some level of macro criticality, because they have implications for macroeconomic outcome. So the IMF is flexible. They are flexible to negotiate and discuss. But of course, it will come down to the root cause of the kind of intervention you need to put in place. And I agree with my good friend, Dr. Tio Achampong, that these, what we call conditionalities, are things that should have done probably over a longer period, and the impact of that will be bearable. But once you fail to do that, and you sign up for a program, let's even say an extended credit facility between 3 to 5 years. So assuming it's 3 years, then you are looking at it that within the 3 years, you may have to front load some of those adjustments. So you turn to the path of debt sustainability and growth. So all those adjustments would impose costs on us. Sometimes those costs are unevenly distributed. That is the fact.
Right.
Okay, so...
Prof, it occurs to me that the government has pointed out some of the externalities that have brought us to where we are today. They say that COVID, the Russia-Ukraine war have had, heavy impact on our economy. Now, the Russia-Ukraine war is still going on. COVID is still a global phenomenon. The e-levy, which was supposed to be a cushion to the blow, is still not yielding the dividends required.
Yeah.
So in light of all of these, let's call them externalities, does this limit the impact that an IMF program could have, since these factors are unchanging?
Yeah, certainly. Let's not create the impression that our economic salvation is in the hands of the IMF. No, not at all. Not at all. We are at a situation where we're saying that it's the last resort. We don't have an option. And I'll tell you why. The 16th IMF program actually failed with the supervision of the IMF to deliver on some of the program outcomes. The IMF is aware. Government is aware. We could not achieve debt sustainability the way we had envisaged or earmarked in the original IMF program or 16th IMF program. We did not. We could not. In fact, fiscal discipline, we could not achieve that effectively under the supervision of the IMF in the run-up to the 2016 election. Those were the reasons why we pushed strongly for an extension of the program when the new government took over. So the IMF and its program, there's a limit to how far they can go. But what we are saying is that under the current circumstance, where we find ourselves, we need a hiding place. And that is why when we call on government that, this probably will be the best option right now. It may not be your first resort. We all know that. Okay? But there is an alternative on the table right now from government. And therefore, we need to go to the IMF in order to ameliorate the situation. So that is where we are. So it's not like the IMF will just come in and all our problems will disappear. Certainly not. But you see, if you look at the tightening financing situation, an IMF program would help, and also in terms of restoring some level of confidence in our economy, which will moderate reactions from the offshore investors and even domestic as well. So that is where we find ourselves. And also, depending on the type of program or facility that the government will sign for, would also depend on the kind of reforms or conditionalities that the fund would agree with the government. And let's look at it this way. It is Ghana government program supported by the IMF. The IMF does not impose any program necessarily on any country. No, it doesn't happen that way. So it's Ghana government program supported by the IMF. But of course, the IMF will input negotiations here and there in coming out with a broader program with clear targets, with inbuilt monitoring reporting mechanisms, right, which then that periodic review and publications or disclosure from that in itself gives confidence to the market. In itself puts government on its toes that yes, in 2 months' time or so, there will be a review of the program, and the release of funds are usually tied to the review and performance under those programs. So that is how we should say. So there'll be a lot of discussion, a lot of negotiation, and I agree with Dr. Tio Achampong that there are certain pro-poor social spending that will be protected, and IMF is very much aware. Look, the IMF is here. All that is going on, they are aware.
Yeah.
They understand our needs and all of that. But there's a limit to how far government could go with some of this wasteful spending and some of these social programs that are expensively arranged and inefficiently delivered. Certainly there will be a review of some of those interventions and see in which critical areas we can protect spending and in which areas also we can do some cutting. Look, Winston, whether we decide to go to the IMF or we decide to do this on our own, there are some steep austerity issues that we must embrace, and every Ghanaian should get ready for that. It has to come either through an IMF program, or if we say we will not go to the IMF and
what
we
should
have
we
to do
get
it on
ready
our
for?
own, there's a price that we have to pay in order to restore the economy to a certain debt sustainability path and return to growth and job creation. There's a price we have to pay.
Right.
And what's that price?
Part of that price will be some kind of adjustment that will have to be made to government spending, some revenue issues that we have to embrace ourselves with, and then we have to look at the channels or the tax handles that these interventions will be carried through. In terms of some expenditure restraint, revenue enhancement, we don't have a choice. We have to do that because where our debt level is, and then the associated debt servicing is that huge. And let me tell you where government missed this. Assuming we had signed up for an IMF program in 2021, I believe that we wouldn't have found ourselves where we are right now. If you look at interest rates, even in the domestic financial markets, we are borrowing in excess of 25% now. Winston, you know what that means for interest provision going forward? That is the reason government cannot accommodate priority spending in a manner that would spur growth. This is I believe that, and I'm sure government is aware. We can't go. It can't get worse than this. It can't. Look, if you look at the provision for interest payment in the 2021 budget, 2022 budget, is so huge. Even though we have been talking about compensation of employees and the rest of them, if you look at Ghana's total emolument, right, spending on employees, wages, salaries, gratuities, and the rest of them, compared to our peers, you realize that if you look at it relative to total government expenditure, it's not one of the highest in the sub-region. It's not. So other countries in the sub-region, in terms of their compensation relative to total expenditure, it's higher than that of Ghana. But the reason we are complaining massively now is because of the elevated position of interest payment relative to total government spending. So signing up for an IMF program, assuming is the extended credit facility, probably we could get up to $3 billion. The interest rate usually is very, very low compared to going to the international capital market or the other syndicated arrangement that Dr. Tio talked about. They are much more expensive. So at the end of the day, you are not containing your debt. It's not just the principal or the nominal debt builder, but you're also looking at debt affordability. Okay, so if you look at the debt sustainability indicators, you can talk about debt to GDP ratio, you can talk about others, but you're also looking at the liquidity dimension, debt service to revenue ratio, and where we are right now. In fact, if we are not careful, we will have to be borrowing to be able to service our debt and pay wages and salaries. That is nothing less than a Ponzi scheme.
All right. Dr. Theo, I want to wrap up with you on this question. IMF or no IMF, government still needs to raise revenue. And let me read a tweet from Gabriel Shredakon. He tweeted this last night. He said, if the e-levy is so far not bringing in the estimated revenues, it does not mean it is a bad tax. it means Ghanaians simply do not want to pay taxes. Is that do you agree with this?
I think it's a wrong misconception. It's not like Ghanaians we're already overtaxed. People pay a lot of indirect taxes in the system, from the VAT on petrol and now e-levy and NHIL and all of that. So in fact, and I've seen some studies that look or assess the total impact of taxation across the board, both direct and indirect, and you can actually see that, relatively speaking, Ghanaians are among some of the heavily taxed people, even in sub-Saharan Africa. That is clear, and in the evidence base to back that up. The issue has been that as we formalize the economy, you want more people to be paying like more direct taxes, like PAYE, as compared to the indirect taxes. But let the impression not be created as though Ghanaians are already not paying enough of other indirect, taxes in that regard. The answer to your question really is, I think we have to go back to the 2015 program of the IMF. There were three things that the program sought to do. The first one was to restore debt sustainability, and there the program then said that it was limiting government to hiring and wage increases, but importantly also the government to eliminate subsidies for utilities and petroleum products. And to raise revenue, it advised the government to cut down on tax evasion and also rationalizing the exemptions that that they give. Yeah. So you can actually see some of the solutions are in there in terms of tax rationalization, cutting down on tax evasion. Some of the numbers I have seen, if we can even address the issue of tax evasion within the downstream petroleum sector alone, we don't even need e-levy to start off with. And also the issues of the tax exemptions, where importantly we need to pass the tax exemptions bill that is sitting in Parliament. The second thing that the 2015 program sought to do was to strengthen monetary policy. And here the agreement in 2015 was that the central bank was going to gradually end the financing of the budget deficit, which was actually driving inflation in that regard. What do we see currently? If you look at the data from the central bank, you still see, to an extent, the net domestic financing component going up. So the central bank, in essence, is a part of driving some of the deficits that we're seeing. And no wonder then that the current inflation targeting regime is not working. Remember that the central bank's target was between 6 and 10%. Currently, we're talking in excess of 27%. Some of it attributable to the conflict, but other ones to really due to what I call self-imposed issues in there. The third aspect of what the 2015 program sought to do was to clean up the banking system, and we know that that has largely been done. But we're still seeing net domestic arrears and the asset quality indicators beginning to take a little bit of a downward dip within the banking system. So the solution for me is twofold. Going back to what the 2015 program sought to do, the first two things on addressing the debt sustainability issues, where we have to fundamentally deal with the fiscal side of the equation, and then on the monetary side of the equation, getting the inflation mechanism to actually work, but getting the central bank not to be overly printing money to support, the deficit that we're seeing. Because remember, again, and this is my last point, if we go back to the outcomes of the 2015 to 2018 program, the IMF in May of 2019 had an article that they wrote, and they said that the outcome is that, quote, Ghana is on the mend, and that the trade and the budget deficits are narrowing and all of those things. But they made a very important point, and this was the last point they made in that statement, that maintaining fiscal discipline will also be a challenge. And this is where I think fundamentally we need to start tackling the problem from, as Prof. Have also alluded to.
Right. In 10 seconds, could an IMF program mean the scrapping of the e-levy?
I don't think that the government is going to scrap the e-levy. I think if we are being honest, some people would be willing to pay. And the idea was that they should reduce the tax threshold or the trigger point below 1%. I had even argued 0.5%. Fundamentally, I am against the e-levy because I think it's a theft of people's or tax grab of people's savings. But even if the government decided to push or to go through with it, I don't think it should be 1.5%. Something far lower than 1% or 0.5%. The research we just did backs that up, and perhaps they will even collect far much bigger than what currently has been the case.
Very well. A big thank you to both of you, Professor Bokpin of the University of Ghana and Dr. Theo Achampong, who is a risk analyst. Thank you both for your time with us this morning.
Thank you.
More on the show after these.
Fidelity Bank says Yenko Dubai. It's our 15th anniversary, and to celebrate, we're taking our most dedicated agents to experience Dubai feely. The agents with the highest number of accounts opened, transactions performed, and agent signups will earn this fabulous all-expenses paid vacation to Dubai, a staycation at the Royal Senchi, lunch with top Fidelity executives, and brand new mobile